The police were filmed often being misogynistic, sexually inappropriate, racist, and violent towards people they had detained. And wear a uniform and do it and be protected by wearing a uniform, then being on the other side, I actually quite enjoy beating people up. And I do believe that I'd like to offer you a psychiatric analysis which may assist in understanding this very serious and problematic phenomenon. Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Raj Persaud. I'm a consultant doctor and psychiatrist based in private practice working in Harley Street in London in the United Kingdom. I want to talk a little bit today about this extraordinary BBC documentary under the Panorama rubric, which has involved secret filming of the Metropolitan Police here in London, in particular focusing on a particular police station that has over the years become somewhat notorious, Charing Cross Police Station. So the BBC sent in an undercover reporter. He basically masqueraded in the sense that he did have an actual job in the police station. He wasn't a policeman. But his job was a cover for the fact that he was secretly filming the police. And he used his access to the police station, doing an actual job, which was something to do with looking after the detainees, to get close to the police officers on the beat, on the street, develop a relationship, a friendly relationship with them, and secretly filmed a lot of quite extraordinary bad behavior by the police. The police were filmed often being misogynistic, sexually inappropriate, racist, and violent towards people they had detained. And there was a whole host of inappropriate attitudes and behavior. Sir Mark Crowley, the head of the Metropolitan Police, has acted more or less immediately, and I think taken action against at least 9 officers, and has indicated that he's going to make his best efforts to stop this kind of thing happening. And he's indicated that he's not going to resign. The central problem I want to discuss here, because clearly we're dealing with bad behavior, and there's a sense in which psychiatry and psychology is all about behavior and trying to explain sometimes why there is bad behavior. The reaction of the officials higher up in the police force suggests that they think that there's some bad apples to be rooted out. But there's a really more fundamental question about whether there really are just a few bad apples in the barrel or whether the whole barrel is bad. But I think there's some more fundamental and deeper questions to ask about how we arrive in this situation. And I think it's overly simplistic to suggest that by targeting a few individuals, you're going to fix the underlying problem. We hold the police to very high standards of behavior because they have so much power over us. And in a way, one of the reasons I'm very interested in this situation is it's not a dissimilar situation to the situation of doctors. Doctors have enormous power over people, power that in the wrong hands, as occasionally happens, means they can inflict some quite serious damage. Doctors have the power when you go to see them. There are very few professions where someone can say to you when you go to see them, take your clothes off, I need to examine you. So there's tremendous power involved in that, and that's why you need doctors to be held to a very, very high moral standard of behavior, because people are vulnerable in the presence of doctors. And no amount of excessive regulation, CCTV camera footage, etc., can really protect the public from nefarious doctors exploiting their power, and similarly, nefarious police officers. So the two situations are very similar, and I'm very interested in tackling this question, which I'd like to today, about why do people behave badly, and there's a big hint coming up, which is something to do with power. Why are people drawn to be in medicine or in the police force? There are good reasons to be drawn, moral reasons that you want to do good. But there's some dark reasons to do with having power over people. And unless we address that fundamental issue that sometimes people are joining the police force or medicine for the wrong reasons, and how do we pick that up, is the central question, which I think the BBC Panorama documentary ignores really some of these fundamental issues. And there was very little, if none, no psychiatric or psychological analysis of the characters we were seeing on screen, describing terrible behavior that they're up to or terrible attitudes. And I do believe that I'd like to offer you a psychiatric analysis which may assist in understanding this very serious and problematic phenomenon. Policing is an extremely important thing. The police stand between us and a complete breakdown of civilization. So it's an extremely important job, and it matters to all of us. Whether we haven't seen a policeman for a long time or whether we're breaking the law or not, it matters to all of us in terms of the conduct of our lives, because the police are standing between us and anarchy, basically. So it's very important to all of us that we are policed by people of great character and to very high standards. So this is one of the reasons why the Panorama documentary is very, very troubling. I may sound like a grumpy old man, but we are very worried about the moral decline of society at large and the slippery slope we seem to be heading into increasingly bad behavior. Sorry to maybe use a bad example, but I mean, a million miles away, we saw it on the Ryder Cup. Very bad behaviour by the American spectators, shouting out when the European golfers are about to make an important drive or an important putt. So this decline in moral standards, decline in behaviour, decline in etiquette, rising of rudeness and aggression is everywhere, and it's a very serious problem that we need to think about. And a sign that it's a very serious problem, if the very people that are meant to protect us from anarchy, the police, seem to be declining into anarchy themselves, according to this documentary. I have a lot of experience of dealing with the police at first hand. I should declare an interest here. When I worked as a psychiatrist in the National Health Service, the police would frequently turn up and save my life from extremely violent and dangerous situations. So I have no axe to grind in terms of being anti the police. I have enormous respect for the job. I believe that one of the problems is the job is extremely difficult and pretty horrible, actually, at the street level, and I think people don't take enough account of that. I'm not sure that the Panorama documentary took enough account of that. So I think we need to do what I'm going to argue is a psychological analysis of what was really going on here. People passing judgment in the Panorama documentary. So they had this thing whereby the undercover reporter was basically having a drink and beguiling the nefarious police officers. And then you had a couple of senior people and a Panorama journalist looking at the videotape, and they looked to a very senior police officer to pass comment on how terrible the behaviour was that she was observing, and they went to a former Attorney General under the Prime Minister David Cameron's government to get his comments. It was pretty striking that these two individuals passing judgment of a pretty negative nature on the police officers who were being secretly filmed clearly came from a certain social class in society. They spoke in a very articulate and proper, slightly hoity-toity way, if you don't mind me putting it this way. So these were clearly middle class, very middle class, upper middle class, educated people. You could tell that from the way they spoke. And it seemed to me there was a kind of barn door elephant in the room class issue here. I know, again, it's politically difficult to talk about class, but the people on the street who were the police officers doing this very difficult job on the coalface, on the front line of the war that's on the streets, came from clearly a different social background in terms of the secret filming. These were people who were swearing a lot and had a very different kind of vocabulary choice from the people who were passing commentary. So one of the issues was senior management of the police seemed to be very far removed in their background and the way they talk and the way their outlook on life from the officers they're meant to be managing on the street. It was striking in the documentary that we never seemed to see a senior manager turn up at the Charing Cross police station, because none of the secret filming seemed to show a manager turning up and walking the shop floor. They seemed in a way almost like we see, actually, frankly, in the National Health Service, a kind of class war between senior people and junior people. And maybe because of that class war, that's one of the reasons why bad things happen, because the managers are running away from what the terrible experiences on the street, rather than engaging with it. It was striking, and no one passed comment on this, that in all the secret filming, we never saw a senior manager turn up and walk the shop floor. And I thought that was quite a striking problem. So there was a distinct lack of sympathy from these senior officials watching the videotape of the poor people on the street. When I say poor, I'm not excusing their behaviour. They behaved reprehensibly, the police officers that were being filmed. But one of the things we need to think about is it is such a difficult job being a policeman. Charing Cross, central London, Friday night, 3 a.m, drunk people, mentally ill people, people who spit on you, etc., etc. It's a pretty thankless job. Surely you don't need to be Sigmund Freud to see that these officers who were behaving badly, don't get me wrong, but if we try to think more deeply about why this is going on, they have a horrendous job. It's a very difficult job. And frankly speaking, my experience is the police get dumped on. They are dumped on by inadequate mental health services who don't turn up and instead say, call the police if you've got a violent person who's possibly insane, taking their clothes off and directing traffic in the streets. Mental health service dump on the police, and the police end up picking up basically a lot of stuff that really should be dealt with by NHS mental health services. So undoubtedly the police are going to get resentful. The police are dumped on by social services who don't pick up the baton in terms of things they're meant to be doing and say, call the police. They are dumped on by everyone, everywhere, and they end up doing an extremely distasteful job, which people who rush to judgment should be cautious about, because you wouldn't do that job. And it raises an interesting possible explanation for what was going on, which is you've got people who are very upset and angry. They're not happy people. And when you've got people who are upset and angry and not very happy doing a very difficult job where they have power over other people, then bad things are likely to happen. I am not excusing these terrible policemen that we saw behaving in a misogynistic, sexist, racist, etc., manner. What I'm trying to do is go slightly deeper and try to understand why this situation is occurring again and again. It is very easy to rush to judgment and think we live in a black and white world full of villains or heroes. And I'm trying to develop a deeper understanding of what was going on here. By the way, talking about that distinction between villains and heroes, it was very interesting going back to the darker motivation that several of these police officers, the ones who were behaving badly, when asked about themselves, seemed to like being in a fight. And it's almost as if, actually, there was a very fine dividing line between some of them and hooligans on the street who they would be arresting. It was almost like I prefer to get paid to beat people up and wear a uniform and do it and be protected by wearing a uniform than being on the other side. I actually quite enjoy beating people up. We'll come back to this issue of the darker motivation of power over people. Is that the wrong reason for being a policeman or a doctor? But are some people of a psychopathic, dark side of human nature drawn to these two professions because of the desire to have power over people? And actually, at a deeper level, do the police need to try to be rooting that out? And we come to another interesting point, which is these regulators and people who were quick to pass judgment on the police on the streets are actually really the source of the problem. There's a kind of like management by Excel sheet, which is plaguing the nation, plaguing medicine, and plaguing the police force. Excel arrived a few years ago, and then we had management by Excel spreadsheet, which meant what was happening was you managed by measuring stuff, and you measured the arrest record of a policeman or woman and decided that was what made them a good policeman or woman. And Theresa May is a classic example. As Prime Minister and also Home Office Minister, made a big deal about stop and search, but then again the police were being measured by the number of times they stopped and searched people. That was a measurement criteria, but by whether they were doing a good job. If you give that as a measurement criteria, stop and search, then they're going to do a lot of stopping and searching, because that's what you're measuring as an indication of of being a good police officer. A lot of what makes a great police officer, like what makes a great doctor, is not obviously measurable. And in fact, my experience with some great police officers on the beat is they turn up, the community have such massive respect, the altercation they were called to stops immediately, and this great police officer doesn't have to arrest anyone. He's handled the situation so well, so adeptly. They're such a great amateur psychologist that they don't have to arrest people. They get order by just turning up through their sheer force of character. Because they don't arrest anyone, it doesn't get measured on the Excel spreadsheet, and the management decide this isn't a good police officer. They are missing the point of what is a good police officer. And that was one of the fundamental problems with this Panorama documentary. It was very keen to identify bad police officers without asking a deeper question, which is, how do we encourage good policing? Where are the good police officers, and how would you find them? Because you won't find them on an Excel spreadsheet, I can assure you of that. And therefore, the very management that is going to now go and root out more bad apples and keep resorting to the old management by Excel spreadsheet is actually the real source of the problem, and is going to be compounding the problem, in my opinion. So we didn't see any manager turn up to walk the shop floor, which again was a serious problem that no one seemed to comment on. And we've got this issue of what is it that actually is a good doctor, and could the regulator spot a good doctor? Could the regulator spot a good police person? Because these are intangible things that are difficult to define, but are actually immediately recognizable when they're seen. So the trouble with the Panorama documentary was it went big on the scandal bit, which is, ooh, we secretly filmed people and they behaved really badly, without asking deeper questions about what was going on. By the way, I thought it was very odd that the police themselves who were being secretly filmed by this undercover reporter couldn't spot that something odd was going on in terms of this undercover reporter. He was very keen to sort of encourage them to vent and download. And again, psychologically, I think one of the reasons they entrapped themselves was very few people listened to them or were interested in them. Here comes this undercover reporter showing a great interest in their experiences. And of course, they loved it and they downloaded it and landed themselves in trouble. But in a way, you could see the neglect and the fact these are a group of people not happy, being ignored. And therefore, that, to some extent, may explain this terrible thing they did. I'm not excusing it. I'm trying to understand it at a deeper level. But here's the thing. You're swearing, you're misogynistic, you're being racist. You've got this guy asking you lots of questions who seems never to say anything racist or misogynistic. I'm talking about the undercover reporter. Obviously, he's not going to, because if he did, he'd be in trouble with the BBC, almost certainly. So again, surely he would stick out like a sore thumb with all this swearing and misogyny all around him. And this guy's just asking questions all the time. Oh, what did you do that? And etc., etc. But they never spot it. Which again, sorry to be harsh, may suggest they're not the brightest tools in the box. But policing is too important a job to leave to people who are not particularly bright. But were these people left behind because they're not particularly bright and end up at the bottom of the pile and treated badly by the police services themselves, not seeing how important a job it is that policing is? And maybe that is the fundamental problem. It is an extremely important job. We don't give the police enough respect, enough kindness. The system does not look after the police. It doesn't encourage great policing, and great policemen, in my experience, are not identified by the system, and therefore they're not rewarded for being great police officers, and sooner or later the system therefore creates this problem. The system diverts attention from its failings by trying to point at the villains, which are the few bad apples, without seeing that actually the barrel itself is responsible for creating the bad apples. I'm afraid to tell you something. This scandal will appear to go away for a bit, but will come back until we deal with the underlying structural issues that underpin why they're bad doctors from time to time and bad police from time to time. Thank you very much.